Welcome back, folks. Let's dive into this radical rethink of Paul's legacy, where the lines between Pharisee and opportunist get seriously blurred.
Absolutely. It's a topic that really shakes up what we think we know about early Christianity.
Right. The core idea here is that Hyam Maccoby challenges the common portrayal of Paul as the faithful apostle to the Gentiles. Instead, he posits that Paul was less a devout Pharisee and more a shrewd, even political architect of Christianity.
And it's interesting because it turns the traditional narrative on its head, suggesting that Paul might have, essentially invented a new religion.
Exactly. Maccoby argues that Paul, despite his claims of being a Pharisee trained under Gamaliel, actually showed a lack of true Pharisaic understanding in his writings. It's like he was wearing a badge he never really earned.
That's striking. How does he support that claim exactly?
Well, for one, Paul's depiction of the law, calling it the curse of the law in Galatians, is completely off base for a Pharisee. Pharisees saw the Torah as a divine gift. It's almost as if Paul was appropriating a language that echoed Greco-Roman mystery religions rather than genuine Jewish tradition.
So, in essence, Paul might have deliberately misrepresented his heritage to gain broader appeal?
Yes, that's the idea. Maccoby contends that Paul was strategically crafting his persona to connect with a Gentile audience rather than holding true to his Jewish roots.
Fascinating. And what about Paul's Damascus Road experience? Maccoby seems to cast doubt on the genuine nature of that vision, right?
Exactly. He suggests that Paul's so-called conversion was less a moment of divine revelation and more a kind of visionary synthesis, a moment where he seized the opportunity to engineer a religion that was, more palatable to the Hellenistic world.
That's a really provocative take. It almost implies that the encounter with the cosmic, almost pagan Christ was more of a reinvention than a true conversion.
Right. It's like instead of receiving a direct message about the original Jewish reformer that Jesus was, Paul transformed that message into something entirely new, something that aligned better with Greco-Roman ideologies.
I can see that. The idea is that Paul repackaged the story to subvert the original teachings rather than carry them forward intact.
Yes, exactly that. And then there's his head-on confrontation with the Jerusalem church. In Galatians, he even mentions taking on Peter, which hints at more than just a doctrinal debate. It's a power play.
So we have a scenario where Paul is not just a messenger, but potentially a rival leader, challenging the authority of the original disciples.
Correct. It's almost as though Paul intended to override the Jerusalem church's interpretations and set a new course, one more aligned with, a visionary reformation that prioritized salvation by faith over strict adherence to the law.
I see. And then there's the whole enigma of his Roman citizenship. That detail always seemed odd.
Absolutely. Roman citizenship was a rare privilege for Jews in places like Tarsus. And Maccoby hints that this might have been more than just an accident of birth. Paul's status could have been instrumental in his political maneuverings.
Meaning, his citizenship might have provided him with the mobility and legal cover to push this new agenda without fear of retribution.
Right on. Maccoby speculates that Paul may have even been a collaborator with Roman authorities, using his status to, keep a lid on the more volatile messianic movements emerging at the time.
That definitely adds a politically strategic layer to his character. It kind of shifts our view of him from a purely theological innovator to someone with clear political motives.
Exactly, and that's where the whole idea that Christianity is essentially Pauline comes into play. Maccoby argues that Jesus was originally a Jewish reformer whose mission was to return his people to strict adherence to the law. But Paul repurposed that message to create an entirely new religion, complete with salvation through faith alone.
It's almost like Paul took the raw materials, the story of a martyred prophet, and, reshaped them into something that resonated far beyond its original context.
Right, exactly that. The transformation seems to have been not just theological, but also cultural and even political. The elimination of practices like circumcision and kosher laws really underscores that shift.
But I have to ask, what about the critics, the scholars who push back on Maccoby's claims?
Good question. Scholars like E.P. Sanders and James D.G. Dunn argue that despite his innovations, Paul was still fundamentally rooted in a Jewish mindset.
Yeah.
They point out that Paul quoted Jewish scriptures extensively and maintained continuity with Jewish traditions.
So they'd say he wasn't entirely rewriting the book, but rather building on it?
Exactly. Bart Ehrman even underscores that Paul's extensive scriptural references are evidence of his deep engagement with Jewish texts.
Absolutely.
It's more like he was adapting Jewish thought for a broader context rather than outright abandoning it.
Still, Maccoby's approach forces us to reconsider. Were we too quick to take Paul's word as gospel?
Right. And there's the nagging question: if Paul invented Christianity the way Maccoby suggests, then in essence, what we consider Christian might be far from what Jesus originally intended.
That's a tough pill to swallow for many believers. It almost makes you wonder if Christianity, as we know it, is built on a sort of, cultural negotiation rather than a pure, unaltered doctrine.
Indeed, it's like a case of historical reinvention. Paul might have taken a set of religious ideas, and by recontextualizing them, he transformed a movement into something that could appeal to a much wider and, frankly, more politically connected audience.
But don't you think there's a risk in taking Maccoby's interpretation too literally? I mean, respectfully, it does seem a bit reductive to paint Paul entirely as a political opportunist.
That's a fair critique. While
Yeah.
Maccoby's arguments are compelling, they might oversimplify a complex historical and theological figure. Paul was, after all, operating within a multifaceted context where religion, politics, and personal experience intertwine.
Exactly. And even if Paul's actions were opportunistic, it doesn't necessarily negate the sincere elements of his faith as expressed in his letters.
True, there's an element of passion and genuine belief in his writings. It's like he was both a reformer and a strategist, the kind of duality that makes historical figures so intriguing.
Right, he's a paradox, both a product and a master of his time. That duality is what fuels so much debate among scholars and theologians today.
Absolutely. And it raises that big question. If Paul essentially founded a new religion, how does that influence what we consider to be Christianity versus Jewish reform?
Yeah, it's like peeling back layers. At its core, it forces us to ask, do we view Christianity as the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy, or as an entirely new creation spurred by Paul's reinterpretation?
Exactly. It's a real identity puzzle. And this debate has far-reaching implications for both historical scholarship and modern faith communities.
I find that really fascinating, how historical narratives can shape our beliefs even today, and how these critical perspectives can ignite deeper conversations about identity and authenticity.
Right. Whether you're a believer, a scholar, or someone just curious about the origins of ideas, questioning the established narrative can be both unsettling and enriching.
Absolutely. And while Maccoby's position might not be universally accepted, it definitely provides a fresh lens through which to examine a familiar story.
Agreed. It's a bold challenge to the conventional wisdom that invites us to reconsider everything we think we know about Paul and early Christianity. And that's what makes this debate so invigorating.
So in the end, we're left with lingering questions. Was Paul a true Pharisee, a crafty opportunist, or a bit of both?
Exactly. It's a conversation that's as relevant as it is controversial, and it urges us to look at historical texts with a fresh, critical eye.
Well said. It seems that whether one sides with Maccoby or the more traditional scholars, the story of Paul remains a deeply layered mystery.
Right, and it's these layers of theology, politics, and personal transformation that keep the discussion both dynamic and, endlessly fascinating.
Absolutely. Thanks for this engaging dive into Paul's legacy. It really gives us a lot to ponder about the origins of Christianity.
For sure, thanks for joining in this exploration. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and stay curious.